Thank you very much. Good morning. I want to talk about disability and my passion for making the invisible visible. There's been quite a few TED Talks about disability, but almost all of them have been given by people with a disability. That's not me. I am non-disabled. I do, though, have some lived experience of disability. My brother Patrick had Down syndrome, and he died from complications that resulted from his disability. Meanwhile, my nephew Viv has Asperger's syndrome. I thought that that was quite a lot of disability in one family until I heard this amazing fact that 1 in 5 people, whether in Britain or in the world, have a disability. 1 in 5. Let's just think about that for a second. The average size of a household in the UK is 2.5 people. So just think for a second about your home and your next door neighbours. The chances are that one of you will have a disability. Now, isn't it therefore just extraordinary, I think it is, that disabled people are so relatively invisible in the world? One field where they are more visible is in the area of sport, and this is something that I know a lot about because for many years I was one of the bosses of Channel 4, the broadcaster of the Paralympic Games in Britain. The company has a long history of championing minority groups, so the Paralympics was a bullseye, really, and not least because the Games was coming to London in 2012. Now, having been lucky enough to win our bid to broadcast the Paralympics, the first thing we did was to try and find out what public attitudes to the Paralympics were. So we got some researchers, they did their research, and they came back to tell us, and here's what they said. It's not a pretty picture, I'm afraid. They said, okay, the good news is that people have heard of the Paralympics, and they know what it is, but almost no one, hardly anyone watches it, and few people can name a Paralympian. And what's more, it has this air of sympathy about it. And you, Channel 4, and your ambition to popularise the Paralympics is going to be almost mission impossible. Why? Because to be popular, people will need to see it as elite sport. Now, the Olympics is seen as elite sport, but inside their heads, many people believe that Paralympians will never be as fast, never be as strong, and never have as much endurance as Olympians. And that, they said, is people's atavistic view. Now, that was like a red rag to a bull to us. We piled out of that particular meeting and we said, right, we're gonna find the Channel 4 dictionary and look up the word atavistic. And it turns out that what it means is it's your innermost cave person instinct. So right from that moment on, our mission became to prove this theory wrong, that the Paralympics couldn't be popular in a mainstream way. And that's what we did. We started out with this big advertising campaign called Meet the Superhumans, with athletes doing the most incredible things, both in training and in competition. And it was set to a Public Enemy soundtrack called Harder Than You Think. And together with hours of amazing TV coverage, it just blew the doors off. The Games were the first time it had been a ticket sellout by a mile ever. The TV ratings were through the roof, and 4 in 5 people in the UK said that their attitudes towards disability changed as a result. It was a very similar story in Rio 2016, even though we weren't on home turf and there was a 4-hour time difference. And after those games, the biggest exam board in Britain phoned up and said, we're going to now include your efforts to popularise the Paralympics in the A-level and GCSE curriculum. And you know, as a parent, it's hard for me to think of a greater compliment than that. But also, more selfishly, it now means that there's one subject I'm confident I might be able to actually help my kids, Gus and Fordy, revise for. Now, how did all this happen? Well, in essence, it was very simple. We put disabled people in the driving seat. Now, they were the stars of this advertising campaign. They were obviously the stars of the heroes of the sport. But we also had disabled people presenting the TV coverage. Now, that just seems like the most tremendously obvious thing, doesn't it? Disability sport presented by disabled people. Genius. Only no one in the world had ever done anything like that before. For London, our commitment was that 50% of the presenters would be disabled. That's 8 people. Now, that doesn't maybe seem like quite a lot, except when you consider that there were only 3 presenters on any type of channel in the UK with a disability presenting any type of programme. So we had to find them, and we did, and we had to train them, and we did. And when people turned on their television sets and the games came up, they were just amazed about the feats that they were watching on the field of play and the stories that they were hearing, and people really connected with it. And it started a revolution. We began to put people with disabilities in many more of our programs, and so did other channels. Why? In most cases, not because they were disabled people, but because they were brilliant people. The other thing that we started to do was to ask, how could we employ more people with disabilities? Now, for Rio 2016, 20% of the production team had a disability. That's very high. One of the producers who has cerebral palsy had this to say about that. She said, well, it was good news and bad news. Good news because here was a job where disabled people had 10 times the opportunities that they normally do. Bad news, on any other job, when I want to go to the bathroom, I just waltz into the disabled toilet. Well, now there's a queue around the block. I was talking to the head of one of the UK disability charities about this question of how to best employ more people with disabilities. And he stopped me dead in my tracks by saying, well, you can start by considering that there are probably more people in your company already with disabilities than you think. And I was further rooted to the spot by another who said, and don't forget that most disabilities are not visible. Most disabilities are not visible. I'd never heard that before, so I said, well, all right, well, what are these disabilities? Well, let's list some here. You've got dyspraxia, dyslexia, diabetes, depression, dementia, my brother's Down syndrome. And folks, that's just the D's of the alphabet. There are dozens of different types of disability, of impairments, and of conditions. And the truth is, each individual person's disability is unique to them. Anyway, we set about trying to work out whether there was this iceberg effect within the head office of our company. And it turns out that there was. Around that time, 2% of the company were disclosing as having a disability, which was pathetic. And we developed a campaign to try and give people the confidence, if they had a disability, to start disclosing it. And we thought with this, maybe we would get the number from 2% to 3% or 4%. More or less overnight, when this campaign began, the number went from 2% to 12%. That is an amazing jump. I mean, I was astounded. We had to send the numbers back to be checked, but it turns out that they were correct. Let's just think about that for a second. There was round about 10% of this community who had an aspect of their identity that they were keeping secret. And when we started to ask people, well, why is that? The answer came back again and again. People said, well, I've been told from an early age, often by a parent, by a teacher, by a friend, I wouldn't be talking about that, and I certainly wouldn't be talking about that in the workplace. That's not going to help you. That's going to hinder you. And that, folks, is what social stigma does. Only here's the really amazing thing. When you remove social stigma, just the most miraculous things can occur. For many people in this group, they were now enjoying the double benefit of being released from the stress of keeping their disability secret and receiving positive and active support for their disability, and they began to fly. They began to fly. Why? Because we had created this culture of disability visibility. And with the lifting of that particular fog, another thing became crystal clear, and that is that disabled people frequently are more creative, more determined, and more resilient than their non-disabled counterparts. Let's just repeat that for a second. It's just an amazing thought to me. Frequently, disabled people are more creative, they're more determined, and they're more resilient than their non-disabled counterparts. Why? Because so often they have to be. Because they're trying to go about and succeed in a world that's not geared towards them. It's not their impairment that disables disabled people, it's society. And sometimes this can lead to the most incredible superpowers. Let me give you some examples. I mean, I see it close to home with my nephew Viv, who has Asperger's and his amazing guitar skills. But I also see it littered through the pages of human history. Let's take two areas of life as an example, art and science. Now, we all know that Frida Kahlo and Vincent van Gogh had disabilities. We know that because they put it in their paintings. And we know that Stephen Hawking had multiple disabilities. That was just a fundamental part of who he was. Everybody could see that. But less well known are the theories about other geniuses having a disability. Leonardo, Picasso, Isaac Newton, Einstein. And I could go on. I could go through musicians. I could go through inventors. I could go through politicians and entrepreneurs. The point is that in the high achiever stakes, disability crops up time and again. Now, that's not to say that all disabled people have a superpower, or that if they do, that they're superhuman all of the time. Far from it. Or indeed, that having a disability can't be a source of great challenges some or more of the time. But if disabled people, with a small amount often of support, adjustments and understanding, the talents that disabled people have can really flourish. And the sooner the world realizes this, the better we're all going to be. I'm not telling you all of this because I'm disabled. I'm a swamp person. I'm straight, white, able-bodied man of privilege. And swamp beings have been in the driving seat of the world for very much of human history, haven't they? But with fresh talent, there's fresh hope for the world. With fresh talent, there's fresh hope for the world. And where can we find some of that talent? We can find it in this great underground reserve of human potential that exists in 1 in 5 of us. And how are we going to do that? We can all do that by helping make the invisible visible. Thank you very much.